Hey, Chopper here, and we have got Marissa Hewitt today on the chopping block. Marissa, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Drew.
And I tell you what, everything I have learned about Harlem Lacrosse has been of interest to me. And so I'm going to get out of the way. But I think our listeners would be really interested first in hearing about what Harlem Lacrosse is, what's your charter, and what sort of things have occurred along the way.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me. This is awesome. I love what you guys are doing for lacrosse and the lacrosse community. Harlem Lacrosse, as the name suggests, started in Harlem, New York, and originated from one teacher and one team who realized that by bringing some of his most challenging students out to the yard during their free time and handing them lacrosse sticks and just kind of playing around, he was able to kind of come at them from a slightly different angle and was able to engage with them in a slightly different way than the more formal teacher pupil, teacher student relationship. And it really transformed his ability to form relationships with those kids and to have the kind of impact he was looking for. That's our founder, Simon. So I think from that individual's kind of revelation and passion, Harlem Lacrosse was formally born 10 years ago. It's actually our 10-year anniversary this year that we'll celebrate this October with our benefit. But what started in New York replicated itself in other cities. We're also in Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Los Angeles is the fifth and newest city. And the mission is pretty simple, that there are some pretty obvious equity gaps in education in America, and that if you attend an under-resourced school, you are more likely to not have the opportunity to take part in critical extracurricular activities or receive the type of support that you really need to thrive. And that by partnering with schools, Harlem Lacrosse's mission is to work with students and families in these lower income communities to help fill some of those gaps by providing those resources for free. So our program directors go to school all day, which is a really unique model. And they push into classrooms and help teachers. They pull kids during free periods to work on schoolwork or to work on, behavior stuff or just kind of whatever else is going on, serve that like mentor counselor role. A lot of tutoring happens. And then Harlem Lacrosse very actively partners with other organizations, corporations who can provide sort of corporate training or internships and job ideas for kids. Lots of people who so generously volunteer their time as tutors. And then the sort of obvious part of Harlem Lacrosse is that we run really robust after school services. So part of that is the lacrosse piece, practices, conditioning, games, leagues, tournaments, things like that. And then also mandatory study halls and what we name enrichment experiences, which is everything from a field trip to a local college campus, or could be something that's like locally meaningful or just fun. In LA, we like to bring the kids and take hikes. We sometimes hit up the local museums, but it's often kind of tied to one of those three pillars: the academic support, the athletic opportunities, and the enrichment experiences. And through those trio of sort of goals as part of the mission, we aim to just kind of give kids and families the support that we really think they deserve. So the tagline for Harlem Lacrosse is aim high. And what we hope they learn along the way is to be slightly more college focused or career focused, future focused, and start thinking that that can be a future for me. That can be something I can achieve. That can be something that I now have the tools and understand how to work towards, how to ask for support and self-advocate, and all the other skills and habits that kind of come along with that.
So I think that's a good big picture on sort of what communities you guys are involved in and sort of big picture services. Why don't you drill down and profile who are the most likely candidates? Because from what I understand, these are not kids that are having to make time for Latin club and, the orchestra. On the other, so tell us, the profile of the kid and explain how you're filling those gaps for them.
Sure. So Harlem Lacrosse really partners with schools who are in low income communities in those 5 cities I described. And like 99% of the students nationwide in our programs are students of color. And so we are in schools in Los Angeles. I can speak to Los Angeles because that's where my purview is. But in Los Angeles, we are in South LA, we're in Inglewood, and we're in Compton. In Compton, for example, the percentage of adults that have a bachelor's degree is less than 10%. And so we're talking about a community where the school, has no real extracurriculars, and where the opportunity to get involved in some of these other things that we know kids like, that we know enrich their lives, give them a chance to find their thing that they can really throw their passion and energy towards. And so one of the things we look for when we're partnering with a school is the sort of list of resources that are available to schools. And the ones that have the least are the ones that end up being the best partners, because we end up adding the most to that school community in terms of what we can provide for those students and families. So we're talking a lot of kids whose parents did not go to college, so they will be first generation students. A lot of kids who are English second language learners. A lot of kids who are behind grade level in school, who need a lot of academic support. And kids who, quite frankly, are probably way more at risk of dropping out and not making it to high school graduation as some of their peers in other towns and neighboring towns and communities. So the types of kids who end up kind of finding the most positive impact through their participation in Harlem Lacrosse are those that sometimes are having a hard time in school. It might be behavioral, it might be academic, who are struggling, who through the combination of the physical outlet that practice and games and the competition provides, and through the academic support, really make transformational change. And like our most recent impact report, kids who participate in Harlem Lacrosse tend to go to school almost 10 days more than their peers, get a grade level higher on their GPA, and are more likely to report social emotional positive traits like, I know how to ask for help, I think there are adults who support me, things like that. But yeah, generally kids who come to Harlem Lacrosse they've obviously never played lacrosse before, because the communities we're in do not have lacrosse infrastructure, but most of them have never played any organized team sport. So they're learning how to become athletes and identify as athletes, many for the first time as middle school aged kids.
That was going to be my next question. Lacrosse in some ways seems sort of an odd vehicle to approach some of these communities because it's not prevalent there. But, I've talked for the 15 years that I've been involved with lacrosse about what a unique, incredible community it is. Mm-hmm. Different from the basketball group, the baseball group, the football group. I've been around all those, either as an athlete myself or as a parent. And I just think that the lacrosse community, the coaches, the players, the parents, the officials, all have the right thing in mind. That is the sport itself and not glory or any of that type of thing. So I'm curious, when you take these kids who you said have many times never played a team sport and you put them out on a lacrosse field, and let's face it, that whole catching and throwing a lacrosse ball with that stick is one of the more difficult, entry level challenges for any sport. Mm-hmm. Anecdotally or generally, how do you bridge that? How does that work out?
It's a great question. And we often joke as a staff, there's a reason we're not Harlem soccer or Harlem basketball or Harlem football. And what I mean by that is there is something very special about the game of lacrosse, both its history as a Native American sport and the medicine game, and the fact that it really does come to us with more meaning than just a reason to get out on the field and play. But more specifically for the Harlem Lacrosse, it's actually the perfect mechanism for doing what we're trying to accomplish at Harlem Lacrosse. And here's what I mean by that. Because no one knows about lacrosse, every single kid who comes to our program starts at the same place, which is 0. We don't get 6th and 7th graders who've been playing soccer since they could walk, or who are, on a travel basketball team. Those opportunities are amazing, and I don't mean to devalue them in any way, but the type of really transformational change and learning that is part of Harlem Lacrosse's mission, this more holistic, whole kid, academic, athletic enrichment. The fact that we all start at 0 and the fact that lacrosse is hard actually makes it the perfect tool for what we're trying to do. And so we talk a lot about how we have millions of metrics of how we measure success at Harlem Lacrosse, but we talk mostly about leaps and breakthroughs. And I think the fact that lacrosse is hard means kids learn, again, sometimes for the first time in this type of athletic arena, how to fail and how to be supported through failure. And as a result of that, how to persevere, how to come back when it's frustrating, how to, be a good teammate and notice that somebody else is also frustrated, and how can you support that person through that process. And our coaches spend a lot of time designing practices, understanding that those skills are going to take a long time to really become mastered. And so we break it way down and we let the kids know that it's going to take time. We kind of give them the whole progression. But I do think there's something really special about lacrosse and the difficulty, especially that entry level difficulty, that makes it a magnificent teaching tool. And I think the fact that we go into places that really don't know lacrosse helps us in a couple ways. We've still got that cool, new, interesting, what is that factor that allows us to recruit kids and to get more kids to try it. And then we have this, you're kind of part of something special. There's this really small, tight knit lacrosse community, and you're now a part of it. And I think that it's easy to, it's just like you mentioned before, there's just something different about it. And I think the size still, as lacrosse has exploded in Southern California and nationally, you can forget sometimes that it's still such a small community, really, relative to the other sports. Right. So I do think that that's such a good point, and I actually think it works to our advantage in this particular case.
Okay, why don't we personalize the participants a little bit? Can you just think of some of the best success stories, or funny stories, or something, but personalize it with some real life scenarios that you've seen some kids go through?
Sure. Well, first off, top of mind, we're coming to the end of the year here. We've got a dozen class of 21 seniors who are about to be graduating high school after the wildest last year and a half any of us have really ever experienced. And before Harlem Lacrosse LA, our organization was City Lacrosse, and it was an after school program that was working in most of the same places that we still are. And the students who are our seniors this year were the very first kids who took a chance and tried City Lacrosse. And through the merger, it meant we actually did not have formal high school opportunities other than our regular Friday practices. And these kids hung on. And I think that we have been calling them trailblazers, and I don't think that's hyperbole in any way. They have not only persevered through all their own obstacles of navigating middle and high school, trying to continue playing lacrosse, even though they didn't attend schools that had programs, and to hit their own academic and athletic goals. So 7 of them are going to go play lacrosse next year at the next level, which is just incredible, since most of them do not go to schools that have lacrosse teams. And you know, they have really set themselves up to have this unbelievable next phase in their academic career. So could not be more thrilled about that. We're actually going to be celebrating them over the next month. And I could talk about each of them individually, but there's almost too many of them to go into. But I do think we've got a couple really compelling stories that stick out to me. Another thing that's on my mind is we're about to return to our overnight camp. And so annually we go up to the Thatcher School in Ojai. We have an overnight camp. Often our partners up in Oakland and in Denver meet us there. Unfortunately, because of COVID, travel is going to make that impossible this year. But our overnight camp is super challenging. It's for some kids, it's the first time they've been away from home for that many days. For some kids, it's the first time they've been out of the city. There's a lot of discomfort being out in the middle of nowhere in the hills of Ojai, you know, for 4 days and 3 nights. And then it's also physically really challenging, as anyone who's been to an overnight sports camp can attest. And I just, you know, the last camp we had was 2 summers ago. And we had this player, Justin, who had, again, classic Harlem Lacrosse kid. He came to us, never played sports, was not in any way athletic, just kind of slogged his way through practices all year, was like definitely improving, but very slowly. And he had already been recognized as somebody that we were kind of like, we don't know if Justin's going to stick with it because it's kind of tough for him. And he keeps coming every day though, you know, and so there's clearly something that's happening. And he gets to overnight camp and it basically physically overwhelmed him. And he went on a hike with the rest of the boys team in the morning. What took everybody else like 3 hours took him 5.5, but he made it. And then in our evening session, the boys closed out the day with some relay races. And it was Justin's turn. We had 4 teams and it was Justin's turn. And he completed the whole relay race course. And the last segment was a sprint up a little hill. And at the top of the hill was the field where the girls were practicing. And so a lot of the girls had already congregated at the edge of the field and were kind of like cheering the boys on, understanding that it had been like a pretty physically grueling day. And Justin gets through the course. He's kind of like limping through. And he gets to the bottom of the hill and you just see his whole body, he just heaved. He's like, ugh. And he just crumbled to the ground. And in one of a moment I will probably never forget for my entire life, the entire camp started chanting his name. 4 kids ran over from the other team. So this was a race for pride. I mean, but, you know, broke from their own teams. A couple kids who had already completed sprinted back down the hill. And when I say they picked this kid up and they carried him up that hill, you know, and he got to the top and he finished. And I think that that's such a good metaphor for what we hope. It was like the sort of manifestation of what we hope will happen, what we hope the kids will get out of it. It was no prodding by a coach for this to happen. They saw a teammate who was so close to the finish line, who had nothing left in the tank, and they just acted and they picked him up and they carried him up the hill. Many of them had already been laying down because they themselves were physically exhausted, and we're crying, we're cheering. It was a really special moment. We've got other individual students who I think have made wild transformations, kids who were at risk of not advancing grade level, who are now getting Bs. And I think the real story of this year is how many kids who are in Harlem Lacrosse have been able to hang on through distance learning, despite having very little access to things like reliable internet or a computer at home, or middle school kids who've been responsible for taking care of younger siblings and making it tough to, you know, be on in an academic way throughout the school day while still trying to do distance learning at home. But those are a little bit more general. But I love that Justin story because I think it just really it sums up how special that camp is and how important those kinds of experiences are. But I think more than anything, it shows the culmination of the lessons and the effort and that team building that the coaches and the kids poured into those programs over the course of the year and 2 years before then. And it was really proud, really special moment.
That's awesome. That's a great story. So Marissa, I know our listeners are probably interested in you. And from what I recall, this was not, it was very possible that you may never have ended up with Harlem because you had a pretty good thing going as a high school coach. So why don't you give us the baseline of what was going on with that team you had, or those teams you had, and what the decision was like when you made it to leave and join Harlem?
Sure. Um, well, I probably joined lacrosse right about when you were, when those groups of motivated kids at PV High 2004, 2005. I tripped and fell into lacrosse coaching. I never thought this was going to be a part of my life. I moved to California. I started a tutoring business, and one of my first clients showed up with a lacrosse stick. I had played in college, and one thing led to another. All of a sudden, I'm having meetings with parents and athletic directors, and I was just so impressed that the movement to start the team was kid driven, and I was so lucky to have a ground level view of this whole lacrosse sort of birth here in LA County. Um, and so back in the day, yeah, we were one of the only LA County teams that even existed. And then luckily, again, coming back to how small and kind of tight knit the lacrosse community is, um, everybody helped everybody else start teams. We all lobbied CIF together to make it varsity so the kids could get credit for playing. In 2008, I was part of the group that self-organized the playoffs because we knew we were a long way off from that 20% threshold where CIF would take it over, which coincidentally just happened last year. So I was super lucky, and again, did not expect to be there as long as I did. And then, fast forward 14 years later, and there I was still at the helm of that program. And I know you've had a lot of the other lacrosse greats from that era on, Lane Jaffe and Jimmy Burrell. I was very lucky to work with both of them over there and have learned a lot from them, and psyched that everybody's still kind of around and still contributing in different ways in lacrosse. Um and over the years, it's funny because this conversation makes me think that, like, in a weird way, I've now been involved with starting lacrosse in areas where there was no lacrosse before. And again, this is something that I'm doing intentionally now, but that definitely was accidental when I first got involved. And one thing we really tried to accomplish at PV High was to not just set up a foundation and be a resource for other schools and programs, to know that we would support them trying to start new teams and create great rivalries with Redondo. And we always went up and played Kate and Thatcher and the Orange County teams. But one of our big goals was to kind of like create this idea of legacy, and that kids were part of something bigger than just a high school lacrosse team. And so when I think about some of the great teams who won Bay League, who went to the LA City finals a few times, who went on to play college lacrosse, we worked really hard to try to not just be any lacrosse team, but to do something special and to build something that would last for a long time. And one thing that's really cool is a lot of former players are coaching, and I think that speaks to, like, that that there's something special about lacrosse, and especially when you create something that's kind of new and kids and families realize that it creates opportunities. I think it's really cool. But I had I had just had a baby, and I was still coaching, and I had the opportunity to volunteer with City Lacrosse, not as much as I would have liked because of all that other stuff. But they had these great Saturday play days, and I tried to be at as much as humanly possible where I could volunteer my time to support that program. I loved what they were doing. And when when they knew that City Lacrosse was going to merge with Harlem Lacrosse to create Harlem Lacrosse LA, the CEO of City Lacrosse, Mike Levin, gave me a call and he's like, I know that you've got your tutoring and I know that you're coaching lacrosse, but those two things would make you a really great candidate to come help us lead this new chapter of Harlem Lacrosse in Los Angeles. And I read a little bit about the mission. Obviously, that was a no-brainer, aligning with the work that they were trying to do, but I was in kind of a tricky personal and professional place. Um, we were about to launch into a season where I would have had 12 college-bound seniors, like, who were almost guaranteed to carry the team to a LA championship, kids who I had known since middle school. And so there were certain things that were kind of tugging at me, but if I'm being honest, the decision to join Harlem Lacrosse was an easy one. I told the girls when I kind of announced that I was leaving at the end of that season, they were going to be fine. They had already done all the hard work. They knew how to be a team together. With a core like that, they were going to do great. And they did. They went on and went to the LA championship game and won that, as expected. But the work it called me. And so it was an easy decision to make. It was an adjustment for my family for sure, but having been self-employed and working locally, but it was an easy one. The work is so important, it's even more important now. And I just feel lucky to be a part of the crew out here.
Well, that's a very gracious way to put it. But for any of our listeners who haven't been around high school coaches, know that, when you get a championship level team together, it's hard to leave. I played high school basketball in St. Louis for a coach who ended up coaching at the same school for almost 40 years. He won 800 games plus.
Wow.
Took 4 teams to the Final Four, 3 of which went to the championship game, and none of them, including my senior year, won that championship. And so, you invest a lifetime in developing the community, your players, and to make the decision, which you said was easy, but to leave that, it wouldn't be easy for a lot of people. But thank goodness for you, and thank goodness for Harlem Lacrosse that that's the decision that you made. So I'm sure some people are listening. They probably want to know, how do we get in touch with, how do we find Harlem Lacrosse? And hey, it sounds like a good deal. What can we do? So tell everybody how to contact you guys and what they might be able to do to help you guys.
Absolutely. So the easiest way to find us is our website, harlemlacrosse.org. So that can link you up to each of our 5 cities. It has contact information for the people who can get you the right information that you're looking for. Dives a little deeper into some of our stories and impact and some of that information if that's what you're looking for. A big part of Harlem Lacrosse is partnerships. So club teams, high school and middle school teams, tournaments, corporate partnerships. These are what make our program tick. This is what helps us create meaningful experiences for the kids in our program. So if you are part of a team that wants to learn more about getting involved, definitely reach out. And on the more individual level, we're always open to and always looking for motivated individuals who want to help out. And that could mean volunteering as a coach. It could mean volunteering as a tutor. We have some paid part-time assistant coaching positions, summer camp. And because our program runs year round, I know a lot of people's availability kind of changes with the seasons, and so does our scheduling. But there are ways to kind of plug in from a one-off, like let's plan some clinics between our 2 teams, to somebody coming regularly every Thursday to a practice, for example, and kind of like everything in between. And then we're looking forward to getting out more now that COVID is kind of hopefully we're in the like later stages of that, and that's winding down. And so I hope people will start seeing us, especially here locally in LA, at more tournaments, at more leagues. And there's, like I said, there's plenty of ways to get involved, and we would love to hear from you guys.
Fantastic. So Harlem Lacrosse, everybody realizes it's using lacrosse as a vehicle to really improve young people's lives and really making a difference. Aim high, like you said, right?
Mhm.
Well, Marissa Hewitt, I want to thank you for joining the show today. It's been great having you on. Maybe in the future we could get you and one of your success stories, one of your students or players on it in the future. But
Absolutely. And if you really want to see, you can look for us on Instagram. We're always posting stories about the kids and trying to feature all their successes and just kind of showcasing their extraordinary talent and accomplishments. And again, can't say it enough, especially this year.
All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for today. I want to thank our producer, Lisa, and LaxRatz, our sponsor, Marissa Hewitt. So much joy and empathy. It all sounds great. Thanks so much. And this is Chopper saying thanks for listening and watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.